Take a moment to look at these two works of art and ask yourself, what do they have in common? Perhaps you notice that they're both still lifes of everyday objects. The high level of detail, the admirable skills of the artists that rendered them, or the similar arrangement of objects within the composition. If you're like me, your eyes immediately gravitated towards the sparkling glass near the center of both compositions. Or, despite the difference in objects, you might have also seen the form of the book in the left-hand composition echoed in the bed in the right-hand one. Now take a moment to consider their differences. There certainly are some stark contrasts here, aren't there? Night and day, dark versus light, the well-burnt candle and the fresh match, a glass half full and a glass completely empty, the use of convincing scale in one and confounding scale in the other. These two works, separated by more than 300 years, speak volumes in their similarities and equally in their differences. In this presentation, I will give a brief overview of the Dutch Golden Age and discuss some of the characteristics of Vanitas paintings. I will then introduce Surrealism and demonstrate how the Belgian artist René Magritte appropriated the imagery, compositional techniques, style, and themes from traditional Flemish art and placed them in a new context for his surrealist purposes. While Vanitas paintings, like this still life with Lighted Candle by Peter Claus, attempted to make their viewers contemplate the realities of life and death, Magritte's work, like this painting entitled Personal Values, caused his viewers to consider alternative realities or the surreal. The Dutch have a long tradition of still life painting that dates back to the 16th and 17th centuries, also known as the Dutch Golden Age. Here are some impressive examples of works from that time. A particular genre of still life emerged called Vanitas. Vanitas is the Latin word for vanity and comes from a passage in the Old Testament that refers to the vanity of vanities. Vanitas paintings carried a biblical or moral message that reminded viewers of the brevity of life, encouraging them to contemplate their lives, their desires, actions, and intentions in consideration of the afterlife. Because of this, they often appealed to both the Calvinists of the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Church during the time of the Counter-Reformation. Vanitas paintings are recognized for their extreme realism, attention to detail, and the depiction of particular objects such as skulls, candles, and food. Each item was carefully selected by their creator for their symbolism. David Bailey's self-portrait with Vanitas symbols, dated 1651, is an excellent example of how artists use symbols in Vanitas paintings. At the left, a young Bailey sits facing the viewer, surrounded by various objects. An image of his deceased wife, extinguished candle, hourglass, flowers, bubbles, and skull serve as memento mori, reminders of death, the fragility of human existence, and the brevity of life. The glinting surfaces of precious objects such as the coins, jewelry, pipe, flute, and glasses catch the viewer's eye, emphasizing the finite nature of earthly possessions, as well as the letter hanging off the edge of the table to the right. The letter brandishes the biblical admonition for which this genre was named for: vanity of vanities, everything is vanity. Ironically, the subjects of Vanitas paintings were not only carefully selected for their symbolism, but for their ability to show off the technical mastery of the artist. Until the latter half of the 19th century, artists shared what the Renaissance writer and artist Giorgio Vasari called the common goal of attaining to complete perfection. In time, their success came to depend largely on their skill, which was synonymous with their ability to replicate their subject with veracity. The painters of the Dutch Golden Age are particularly known for their sharp-focused clarity of detail, and are credited with the invention of oil painting, a medium that helped them to achieve this. Artists apprenticed under expert painters to learn traditional Dutch oil painting techniques. Their success and skills are undeniable in the scrupulous details and diverse textures. Metal and glass catch the light, shining brilliantly, and fabric gleams iridescent. Returning to Bailey's self-portrait, the last characteristic of Vanitas paintings that I would like to discuss is the creation of a highly controlled composition that impersonates chance. Notice that a wine-stained glass in the foreground has been knocked over in a way that enhances the sense of perspective and casts a red glow on a strand of pearls nearby. The lustrous pearls wrap around a smooth scroll. Each object is carefully placed to emphasize the texture of the other. Roses strewn about the table make our eyes move throughout the composition as we connect the light pink dots. At the edge of the table, a letter seems awkwardly placed. It's almost as if the artist has frozen time hundreds of years before the invention of photography, so that the viewer could catch a glimpse of it as it falls to the ground. And those three bubbles hovering in front of him, with no known source, seem slightly out of place considering the scene. However, they do an excellent job of creating a triangular composition like those thought to be most aesthetically pleasing by the artists of the Renaissance. To help balance out the weight of the composition, Bailey's darkly clad figure on the left is juxtaposed by a thick, abundantly folded curtain that frames the top right of the composition. More than 300 years after the Dutch Golden Age, the Surrealist movement began. Believing that the rational suppressed reality, or alternative realities, artists of this movement often experimented with automatism and explored the psyche and the world of dreams in their work. Though Surrealism was not strictly a visual artistic movement in its early days, André Breton, the father of Surrealism, believed that painting lent itself particularly well to Surrealist objectives because images were like windows looking onto alternative realities. Magritte was a Surrealist painter and an admirer of Breton. In numerous writings, he argued that the traditional realism is deceptive and problematic as it limits the concept of reality. He believed that if people could expand their ideas on what reality is, it would open their consciousness. It seems difficult then to imagine what the hyper-realistic style of Dutch Vanitas paintings could have in common with the Surrealist one. But if we take a closer look at the life and work of René Magritte, we begin to see that connection. Dutch traditional still life paintings would certainly have been familiar to Magritte, who spent most of his life in his native Belgium. Belgium was part of the Netherlands for several hundred years until it became its own country in the 1830s. The northern half, known as Flanders, was an important center for art during the Dutch Golden Age. The Dutch masters Peter Paul Rubens, Jan Davids de Heem, Peter and Jan Bruegel, Clara Peters, Anthony van Dyck, and Adrian van Utrecht all lived and worked in Flanders. With such a rich painting history, it's no wonder then that Magritte followed in the footsteps of his Flemish forefathers, with the use of symbolism, his choice of subject matter, his compositional arrangement, technical skill, and style. In Vanitas paintings, the use of commonplace objects reflected the emphasis on the home and personal possessions that came with an increasing middle class and the urbanization of Flemish society. Personal possessions and everyday objects featured prominently in Magritte's work as well. In this portrait of Georgette, the artist's wife, she takes center stage as several familiar items float in the space around her. Starting at the upper left and moving clockwise, the objects are a dove, a leafy branch, lit candle, glove, a note, and a key. We could reasonably expect to see all of these subjects in a Vanitas. The note, floating in midair, echoes the following letter in Bailey's self-portrait. Keys were symbols of earthly existence, and candles represented the passage of time. Furthermore, in Christian art, doves, like that in Georgette, have long represented the Holy Spirit and are often shown with an olive branch as a symbol of peace. Because of their delicate nature and momentary existence, Vanitas painters use flowers to express the fragility and brevity of life. In time, each type came to be associated with moral qualities. Roses, for example, as those seen in these close-ups, symbolized transience. Flowers also function as a visual metaphor for a scripture from the book of Job. One translation says, "We blossom like a flower and then wither. Like a passing shadow, we quickly disappear." Magritte also used flowers, particularly roses, in numerous compositions. Here are just a few examples. Just as the items in Vanitas paintings were carefully selected by their creators as symbols that hold a deeper meaning, so too were the items that Magritte chose for his works. In Vanitas paintings, objects stood as reminders of life and death, while in Magritte's they often were used to transcend our constructed reality. In the Tomb of the Wrestlers, Magritte plays with scale. The red rose fills the room, floor to ceiling, creating an unexpected scene. The artist said, "It is not my intention to make anything comprehensible. I'm of the opinion that there are sufficient paintings which one understands after a shorter or longer delay, and that therefore some incomprehensible painting would now be welcome. I'm at pains to deliver such as far as possible." Magritte's work is filled with the unexpected, constructed in convincing ways. To create a convincing reality, Magritte took after the Dutch tradition of mimetic realism in still life painting. While the art world leaned towards abstraction, he firmly believed that non-figurative art made no more sense than a non-teaching school or than a kitchen which doesn't provide food. In 1916, he began his formal artistic studies at the Académie Royale des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, training which prepared him to work with astounding realism. Throughout the 19th century and up until the opening of the Bauhaus in 1919, the curriculum of art academies continued to draw from traditional art. To create their realistic illusions, the Dutch masters used chiaroscuro lighting. Chiaroscuro refers to the high contrast between light and shadow in a work of art. The empire of light shown here creates a strong contrast between light and dark by playing with the concept of day and night. The sky in the upper portion of the composition is a pastel blue, studded with fluffy white clouds, indicating daylight, while the details of the house and the landscape in the lower portion are barely discernible, imitating the darkness of night. The warm light emanating from the upper story window and the glow of a street lamp, also reflected in the somber waters of the lake in the foreground, emulate the candlelight and reflective surfaces in Vanitas paintings. The painting Personal Values also demonstrates Magritte's training and skill. He uses oils to render the empty blue glass with painstaking detail. The sky seen through it is distorted by its convex shape, and light reflects off the undulating surface of the glass and its stem. A faint blue shadow is even present on the ground where the light shines through. Compare this to Bailey's wine-stained glass that causes a muted red cast on the pearls nearby. Here we also see an arrangement of objects that is comparable with the Dutch masters, but a message that is uniquely Magritte. The match on the floor, the foreshortened shaving brush over the edge of the armoire, and the comb propped precariously on the bed replicate the spontaneity of a Vanitas. Yet their careful placement by the artist causes the viewer to consider their relationship to each other and to their surroundings. Referring to this piece, Magritte said, "The comb separates the individual hairs. The comb will be manufactured, sold, etc. In my house, the comb, and other objects too, has lost precisely this social character. It has become a useless luxury capable of disarming the viewer." Lastly, death and mortality, common themes in Vanitas paintings, are also ubiquitous in Magritte's work. In his opening statement of the Surrealist Manifesto, Breton wrote, "Strong is the belief in life, in what is most fragile in life." Magritte's exploration into mortality is apparent in the three works shown here, replicas of well-known paintings where he replaces the subjects with coffins. In the Palace of Curtains, the word sky is written across the lid of a box that looks similar to a coffin, and a pleasant blue sky appears in the open box at the right. While Magritte's titles often did not seem to correspond to the work, the word palace is often associated with heaven, and curtains synonymous with the end, either of a performance or of life. Again, Magritte surprises his viewers with unpredictable choices to encourage them to contemplate their concept of reality in the afterlife. The Surrealist ideals of the early 20th century were represented by artists in a variety of ways. While some artists explored methods in automatism and tended towards abstraction, René Magritte harkened back to the traditional images, compositional techniques, realism, and symbols popularized in his homeland some 300 years before he lived and worked. However, he used tradition in unconventional ways. As the artist said, his images may have concealed nothing in light of their realistic style, but they reconstructed the real-unreal dichotomy by radically subverting it. Using painstaking detail, Magritte juxtaposed familiar objects with each other and placed them in unexpected contexts, creating alternative realities, evoking mystery, causing a contemplation of the unknowable, and deliberately altering tradition to challenge the viewer's understanding and acceptance of what they see.